Hey, ghoul friends, it's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of ooky, spooky, scary stories from Latin American cultures. Welcome back, ghoul friends. Thank you so much for returning, and if this is your first time, welcome. We've been waiting for you around the ceremonial summoning sacrificial circle. Just kidding. You're fine here. Ghoul friends, hello, huge news. Well, actually, a couple of big things. So before I say what I was going to say, I just want to wish a very happy 10-year anniversary to Jeffrey and myself. Our anniversary is on the 4th. It's July 4th. So sorry, America, the country, the fireworks are for us. Sorry, but not sorry, actually. Jeffrey, as you know, is our resident co-researcher and ghostwriter and the love of my life. I'll say it very plainly. I cannot help it. I love that man. I have loved him for 10 years and I will love him for the next 1,000,000. So happy anniversary to us. Very excited. 10 years, a decade is a very long time to do anything. And it is the best thing I've done in my life is to be in love with him. So Jeff, if you hear this, I love you so much. And I will move on before I cry because I will. The next thing I was going to say is that today, Thursday, July 10th, is also my birthday. Not as exciting, but oh my God, 10 years, July 10th. Wow. Anyway, and normally I wouldn't say anything, but I am going to ask you all for a gift. So I'm just going to go ahead and reveal today's episode. You've already seen it in the title. Today, the show is about the Darién Gap, which is a real place between Colombia and Panama. And this is a migration route, and it's a very dangerous one. And in doing this story, we decided to write a fictional story based off of this real place, based off of real experiences. This is one of those things where reality is just 100 times, 1,000 times more scary than any ghost story. So what I'm asking you all is to make a donation in honor of my birthday to Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders, we found out in putting this story together, does a lot of work at one of the main locations that people come through to after making this journey. And I'm going to explain all about it, of course, in the story, but also when we go over in the context of the episode after the story. I just wanted to preface it with this before we go into the story so that it's on your minds as you're listening. And then we'll, of course, bring this up again after. But in honor of my birthday, I am running a fundraiser on Doctors Without Borders for a month. So from July 10th to August 10th. And you can learn more about it by visiting events.doctorswithoutborders.org/campaigns/Susto. And of course, I will put links to this in my link tree. That's linktr.ee/Susto. I'll put it in wherever I can put a link. I will put a link on my social pages. And of course, that's at Susto Podcast on every platform. So if you look at my social media pages, you will find where to go to that place. But again, it's events.doctorswithoutborders.org/campaigns/Susto. I wrote just like the first number that came into my head is you can set a goal. I set a goal of $500. We'll see what happens. I think any amount of money raised for this is amazing, is great. And if we somehow surpass that goal, that would be mind blowing. And I would be so happy and so honored and so excited and moved by everyone's willingness to donate and your compassion for the work that's being done, not only in the exit of the Darién Gap, but around the world. So again, please visit that link. And I will also say just quick updates about the show. I have 2 events coming up in October. On the 10th, I will be at the Ruiz branch once more of the Austin Public Library, doing another live storytelling session and discussion. The last one was so much fun. Again, thank you for having me, Austin Public Library, and thank you to everybody who showed up and showed out. It was so much fun. So please make it out to the next one. Of course, I will be posting about those on social media. And on October 31st, Halloween night, I will be at the Spirit Social hosted by the Night Owl podcast. Again, I did this event last year. I will be doing a panel. I will have a table present. So please come by, say hi, have a blast on Halloween night with me and all the other amazing creators that will be out there. More information will be coming about that and I will be posting about it. But that means that I have a lot of space open for the rest of October. So as I've always said, if you are someone who organizes events, if you know someone who's organizing an event, please reach out to me. If you see an event that you think that I should be involved in, send me the information and I will reach out to the organizers and lock me in, book me up for the time in October. And also, honestly, spooky season, it usually always ramps up around August and September. And then, of course, it's in full swing in October. And then it kind of trickles into November, sometimes December. So it's my busiest time of year. Of course, I am available all year long, 365 party ghoul. But in spooky season, things get especially busy. So please reach out to me. I'm always willing to work with other creators, with organizers, to bring the spookiness to your events. So again, you can send me emails to sustopodcast@gmail.com. You can visit my socials and send me a DM. That's at sustopodcast on every platform. Or you can visit my website and hit the contact button. That's sustopodcast.com. Before we get into today's story, I do want to let you know, so that you aren't caught off guard, that there are mentions of assault through the story and the sources. So please be advised, as always, take care of yourselves. Now let's go ahead and jump into the story, which is inspired by the Darién Gap. There's a place where the map breaks, where South and Central America are said to touch, but somehow don't, where the Pan-American Highway ends and the wilderness begins. That place is called the Darién Gap. It's not just a gap in geography, it's a gap in humanity, in reason, in safety. A place where the jungle takes and only sometimes gives back. The story you're about to hear is about a woman named Lucia, and how she came to walk through that place, alone, hunted, and watched by things older than the trees themselves. Lucia was 34 years old, a teacher, a mother, a woman who once believed life had rules. If she studied hard and worked honestly, things would work out. She lived in Maracaibo, Venezuela, where the lights flickered more than they stayed on. She had a daughter, Anita, just 11 years old. Her husband was gone, caught in a protest, never to return home. Lucia taught literature in a school that barely paid her enough to afford the basics, sometimes leaving her to pick up odd jobs or ration their food. Her refrigerator stopped working a year ago, so she sold it for parts. When Anita became sick, pale, coughing, fevered, the doctor said she needed special medication that cost more than Lucia earned in 2 months. She borrowed, she begged, and then one night, she decided, I will go and will find a way to send for her. I'll go north. After making sure Anita would be looked after by family, she kissed her forehead while she slept and left before sunrise. The plan was to travel by bus and foot through Colombia, then cross into Panama through the jungle. Everyone knew about Darién. They called it El Infierno Verde, the green hell. But it was free, and that made it the only option. Once she was on the other side, she could find better paying work and send money to her family, to Anita. In the Colombian town of Acandí, she joined a group of migrants preparing to cross. People young and old, even families with toddlers strapped to their backs. Their guide was a man called El Pana. He looked more like a predator than a guide. He was slim, angular, with a snake tattoo curling around his neck. He wore mirrored sunglasses, even in the shade, and spoke like everything he said was a joke no one should laugh at. Lucia didn't trust him. But what choice did she have? The night before crossing, as the migrants cooked over small fires, a woman appeared. She was part of the indigenous Emberá people of the region, with long black hair and beads that shimmered like river stones. She said little, just stood at the edge of the group. When she finally spoke, it was to Lucia. There are places in that jungle that don't belong to people. Places the world forgot to tame. Some places that the earth protects. When the trees stop speaking, When the wind feels wrong, turn around and leave that place. Lucia nodded, unsure whether to take the words as myth, metaphor, or something else. The woman's last words lingered. The man who leads you will betray you, but the Darién will only take those who stop listening. They entered the jungle just after sunrise. The first challenge was mud, not soft, doughy mud. It was deep, clinging, sucking mud that tried to steal shoes and refused to let go. Every step was a fight. Then came the hills that were more like walls of clay. Caminantes climbed on all fours, slipping, scraping hands raw. Lucia helped an older woman who was hyperventilating. No one else stopped. The heat was relentless. Sweat poured from bodies. The air was so thick it felt like breathing through a damp cloth. Rivers had to be crossed chest deep, with currents strong enough to seal your footing if you hesitated. The water stung with insects. One man dropped his pack in a current and tried to chase it. He didn't come back. He would be the first to get separated, but not the last. El Pana said nothing, just lit a cigarette. On the night of day 2, they slept on the wet ground under makeshift tarps of plastic and sticks. But the jungle never slept. It groaned, buzzed, hissed. That night, Lucia heard the first cries. Human, but not. Distant, drawn out like something calling for help but never getting closer. Others heard it too. No one moved. Then came the lights. White-blue orbs floating between trees, low to the ground. They moved like they were watching, waiting. When someone tried to walk toward them, they vanished. El Pana grunted. Ghosts don't kill you. Snakes will. Sleep. No one slept so much as they waited in torment. They lost the next member of their group on the evening of day 3. There was a boy named Rafael. He was 17, very quiet and polite. He helped Lucia across a ravine once, offering his arm. He never spoke unless spoken to. That night, Rafael walked 20 feet from the group to relieve himself. He never came back. They called for him, searched the brush with flashlights. Nothing, not even footprints. El Pana muttered something about jaguars, but no one believed it. Something had taken him. They left without him at dawn. On the 4th day, El Pana stopped the group. The price has changed, he said. No more charity. You want to finish? Pay again. Some protested. He raised his machete. Lucia gave him her last American dollars, the emergency stash meant for Anita's medicine. It wasn't enough. That night, he looked at the women. You can pay another way. The threat hung in the air like his cigarette smoke. One of his men grabbed a girl barely out of her teens. Lucia didn't wait. She ran. Into the dark. Into the jungle. Alone. She didn't know how long she ran. Hours, maybe more. Branches tore at her clothes. Roots caught her feet, but she never stopped. Eventually, the jungle quieted. Too quiet. She was alone. She was just another person separated from the group. She knew they wouldn't look for her. No guides, no maps, no group. Then, a whisper in her mind. West. Head west. The 5th day dragged on for what felt like forever. She rationed what little she had, drank rainwater from leaves, sucked juice from the green guava, tied her shoes with strips of her torn shirt. She hallucinated voices at night, sobbing, whimpering. Once, she heard a baby crying. It reminded her of Anita's own cries as an infant. She needed to help the baby. She followed the sound through the dark for half an hour before realizing the jungle was playing tricks on her. There was no baby. By the morning of the 6th day, Lucia's body was no longer her own. It had become something separate. It was an aching, blistering vessel pulled forward only by stubborn will and the memory of her daughter's smile. Her feet, wrapped in the remains of her socks and shredded shoes, throbbed with every step. Her lips had cracked days ago. Her belly no longer growled. It just ached with a dull, quiet desperation. The forest canopy pressed close around her, thick as a roof of green iron, filtering the sun into a dim and sour light. Every breath was warm and wet, and tasted faintly of rot. She had slept the night before under the roots of a fallen tree, curled like an animal, waking every few hours to swat at biting flies or listen to distant sounds that might have been human or animal, both equally as dangerous in the Darién. The line between dreams and waking started to blur. She walked for hours that morning, moving west as best she could, trusting the faint direction of the sun and the slope of the land. At one point, she slipped into a gully, her knee smashing against a buried root. She screamed, sharp, involuntary, and sobbed once before pushing herself up again. She had long since stopped expecting rescue. And then, as she climbed another ridge slick with moss and loose clay, her head broke the tree line, and she saw it. A clearing, a wide, flat patch of land nestled in the jungle, ringed by trees but free of underbrush. No vines, no thorns, no shadows, just open space. At first, Lucia gasped, not in fear but in relief. An open place meant safety, sightlines, a chance to sit with her back to a tree and see any predator or person approaching. She thought, here I can breathe, maybe sleep, maybe pray to the heavens for help. She stepped forward, her heart lifting for the first time in days. That was when the jungle went quiet. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Not even the leaves moved. The shift was sudden, like someone flipping a switch. Lucia paused mid-step. She turned in a slow circle. The air was perfectly still. The canopy above the clearing was too clean, like it had been rearranged, pruned. A circle of light bathed the ground, but it wasn't sunlight as she knew it. It felt too white, too exact, as if it had been painted on the space. In the center of the clearing stood a structure, or perhaps a formation of stones, not natural, smooth and black, each one the size of a football, stacked in a precise spiral. The spiral coiled inward and upward into a narrow column as tall as her chest. There were no carvings, but the surface of the stones shimmered faintly, like they were sweating or breathing. The surrounding trees stood like guards, tall, perfectly spaced, no branches lower than 20 feet up. Their trunks were too smooth, almost like polished wood. Not a scratch on them. The ground was dry. No insects crawled here, no fungi, no fallen leaves. It was too perfect. And her own breathing, her own heartbeat, sounded too loud in this place. The words from the Imbra woman returned to her then, as if carried on some windless current. When the trees stop speaking, when the wind feels wrong, turn around and leave that place. Lucia took a step backward. Her foot caught on nothing. She stumbled. Her hand reached out to steady herself against a nearby tree, but her palm never made contact. Instead, she felt cold. A rush of air that passed through her like needles, not just on her skin, but in her bones. A deep, unnatural chill that seemed to whisper, "You do not belong here." Her teeth began to chatter. The cold wasn't physical, not entirely. It was spiritual. It was the kind of cold you felt at the edge of a grave. A place where something unseen brushes against you, not with malice, but with indifference. She saw the spiral stones flicker for just a moment, as if something invisible had moved around them. A distortion, a breath, a veil parting. She heard no voices, but she understood this was not a place meant for the living. It wasn't haunted, it wasn't cursed, it was sacred, and it was guarded. "The veil is thin here," she whispered aloud, barely breathing, too thin. Her legs responded before her mind did. She backed out of the clearing step by step, eyes never leaving the center. Only when the insects began buzzing again, only when the trees once more rustled faintly did she turn and flee. She didn't stop until the sound of her footfalls were masked again by the familiar chaos of the jungle. Only then did she collapse to her knees, sobbing, not out of fear but out of overwhelming understanding. The jungle had let her see, and let her leave. But if she had stayed even a few minutes more, she didn't want to imagine what would have happened. After the clearing came a swamp, waist deep, thick with leeches and decay. Each step was a gamble of solid ground or a sinkhole. Her skin was raw, her thighs chafed, her shoes had disintegrated. She walked on blistered, bleeding feet. Then came the hunger. Days of only leaves and mud-thick water she knew would make her sick. She chewed bark just to keep her jaw moving. She thought of Anita to keep herself sane. It would all be worth it to save Anita. 2 more days passed after Lucia fled the clearing, the place where time and sound had disappeared, and the jungle had shown her a sliver of the spirit world. But what haunted her more than the cold or the silence was how beautiful the place had been. Designed, measured, intentional. She had nearly stayed. Now, on the 8th day, her mind was fraying. Her body, too. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Her legs trembled. Her lips bled when she moved her mouth, which she rarely did anymore. She walked through waist-deep black water, tugged forward by pure instinct. She climbed a slope so steep she had to dig handhold into the earth and pray the roots she grabbed didn't tear loose. She was surviving, but just barely. And worse than the hunger, worse than the exhaustion, was being alone. No voices, no other heartbeat to match hers, just the endless throb of the forest, the groaning creak of trees, and the occasional half-heard whisper of something moving just behind her. Never close, never far, just lingering. After 2 more days of walking through the treacherous jungle, heading west, she heard an engine. At first, she thought she was dreaming. Then she smelt exhaust. She clawed through a wall of vines and emerged, blinking, onto Highway 1. Her legs gave out. The jungle had let her go. One of the truck drivers stopped and asked if she needed help. Without waiting for her to respond, he motioned for her to hop into the bed of the truck. Despite it being the middle of the day, she quickly fell asleep during the ride. Lucia made it to a refugee center in Panama. Half of her original group had made it there as well. They told her that El Pana had vanished one night. He had just disappeared into the trees, leaving them lost. Some thought he fled. Others whispered that the jungle had taken him. No one searched. From there, she rejoined the remnants of the group and moved north, step by aching step, into Costa Rica, then Nicaragua, and beyond. Each new country brought more fences, more lines to wait in, more questions from people who had never known hunger in their bones the way she did. She spent nights in crowded shelters, days pressed into the backs of trucks and buses, wrapped in heat and fear. She sold her last necklace for a ride. She borrowed a stranger's phone just to hear Anita's voice for one blessed minute. She told herself again and again, "The hardest part is behind me. I made it through the jungle. I crossed the place where the world ends. If I can just make it to Texas, I can work. I can send money. I can bring Anita back to me. But Lucia didn't yet know what waited beyond that final border. She didn't know how many kinds of wilderness there were. She had faced silence in the heart of the earth. But in the land of walls and policies, she would learn there are places just as dangerous as the Darién. Welcome back, Will friends. Thank you so much for listening to that story. Immediately, I just want to say that, of course, we took creative liberties when writing a fictional story on a show that is about the paranormal. Of course, we weaved in, this whole story was a fiction, right? Based off of accounts of people who have been through the Darién Gap. But we wrote a story based off of this. I'm going to jump into the sources. I will say, as I was going through the sources, it was really hard and it was really emotional for me, especially with everything going on right now. I'm simply not a bystander, but a witness, right, to what's happening in the world right now. And so it was a little rough for me. And I'm just going to say that, I'm just going to preface that because, they, like we mentioned earlier, they refer to the Darién Gap as El Infierno Verde or the Green Hell. There have been other places that are called that, but I think this one also definitely earns that name. So we're going to jump into the sources, and this first one is from a CFR.org, or the Council of, I think, Foreign Relations. And this is an article titled Crossing the Darién Gap, Migrants Risk Death on the Journey to the U.S. Again, all direct links are on patreon.com/Susto podcast. But again, this is CFR.org. So this does a really great job of explaining exactly what this place is. And this says, also this was published by Diana Roy. The photo editor was Sabine Baumgartner in July of 2024. So about a year ago. This says, the Darién Gap is an imposing obstacle on one of the world's most dangerous migration routes. The remote, roadless crossing on the border between Colombia and Panama consists of more than 60 miles of dense rainforest, steep mountains, and vast swamps. It is the only overland path connecting Central and South America. Over the past few years, it has become a leading transit point for migrants in search of work and safety in the United States, as authorities have cracked down on other routes by air and sea. I think the first question that some people may have when hearing about this journey and this route is, why would people risk their lives knowing that this place is a risk, it's extremely dangerous? Why would they enter this? Because, as it said here, is there has been a crackdown on other routes, whether by flying or by boat. And even then, it said that the waters in that kind of area, that region or surrounding that region, that the waters can also be dangerous. But it's kind of like the last resort, right? I think obviously people would not knowingly put their lives at risk if they didn't have to, if they had another choice. And for many people, this is the only choice. This continues here. There are great pictures in this article as well. I'm going to try and post some on the socials, of course, and in the video as we go along. This continues, however, migrants face many challenges on this land journey northward, including treacherous terrain, exposure to disease, and violence at the hands of criminal groups. As the number of migrants grows, with more than 500,000 making the trek in 2023, so too does the impact on the indigenous communities whose lands they often traverse. International aid organizations have sought to manage the crisis by setting up temporary housing and providing basic services to those arriving in Panama, even as the Panamanian government has announced new measures to crack down on migrants and asylum seekers entering the country. So, of course, and there are references a little bit later, there's a reference to an indigenous woman in this story, and this is from the Embera people. They are an Amerindian indigenous group in this area. They're said to live in the Darién province or region, but it is, I looked it up and I was looking at the map, and I'll see if I can put a picture in the video here too. They live along the riverbanks and the shores of Panama near the Darién. So they're not like in the thick of it, but they do technically live in that area. There's also a picture here that highlights what the Darién Gap is between Panama and Colombia. Oftentimes, the way that people make this journey is by other means of transportation. They'll go to this city called Necoclí, And then from there, they take an hour ferry to Akandi, which is technically also in the Darién Gap, but it's kind of like the closest you can get to the exit of it on the other side. You know what I mean? So it's like the shortest route possible, I'm assuming, because this place, it does stretch pretty long, more than 60 miles, but the route that people take is said to be, on average, from each source that we've seen, was about 60 miles. And it's also said that this route can take anywhere from 5 days to 10 days, that it just depends on the weather, because again, as mentioned, there's tons of mud, and it's like, there's pictures in this as well. The mud, you can tell it's like kind of soupy. It's that consistency that you get stuck in really easy. And this is also known as the wettest region of the world, so it rains a lot, but also it is extremely hot. So I think it says on average that it's about 95 degrees with like 95% humidity. So it is treacherous. It's dangerous. You know, people pass out from the heat and from dehydration on this route. I'm skipping ahead in this source. There's a section here called Faced with Danger, and this says, once in Akandi, migrants will head for the Darién Gap jungle, a dangerous hike that can take 10 or more days. I don't know where I got 5 days from. That's my bad. 10 or more days. Many pay to be led by local guides or coyotes. Along the route are smugglers and criminal groups, including members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which I think is said now to be officially recognized as a political party by the government. But they still have like factions that are pretty violent and that still deal with trafficking and drugs and that kind of thing. This continues, and the Gulf Clan, a paramilitary group and Colombia's largest drug cartel. These groups often extort and sexually assault migrants. There's a quote here that says, deep in the jungle, robbery, rape, and human trafficking are as dangerous as wild animals, insects, and the absolute lack of safe drinking water. And that was a quote by John Guff, the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF. He said that in an October 2021 news release. He continues, week after week, more children are dying, losing their parents, or getting separated from their relatives while on this perilous journey. UNICEF estimated that half of the children who crossed in the first 6 months of 2023 were under 5 years old. And I believe in the first 6 months of 2023 there was 60 deaths, so that's like 10 deaths per month of people trying to make it through the Darién Gap. And again, people are taking their children, and God, it's terrifying to think of anybody doing this, but to think of children being taken through here. And by no means at all am I trying to pass judgment. I'm just thinking about how much scarier it might be for kids and for the parents trying to get their kids across. Like, again, I don't think anybody would do this willingly if this was not the only option. And so I'm trying really hard to stay calm about this because you all know my stance on like immigration and the way that migrants and immigrants are treated. And so learning about this and learning about the hell that people go through, that people put themselves through for a chance at a better life, it boils my blood and it makes me, I can't even get into it. You know, if you know me, you know. So I'm just going to continue here. This says, the environment presents an equally large challenge. The Darién Gap is one of the wettest regions in the world. Here we go. And frequent rainfall can trigger landslides in the mountainous terrain. Temperatures can reach 95 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity, exacerbating persistent thirst and hunger. The area's wildlife, including crocodiles and venomous snakes, add to the dangers migrants face. This says here, I'm going to skip ahead again. This is a section called Heading for the United States. It says, another common exit point is the indigenous village of Canan Membrillo, but there at the Bajo Chiquito exit point, they are met by international humanitarian organizations such as, like I mentioned earlier, Doctors Without Borders and UNICEF, which have set up reception centers to provide medical care and mental health services, as well as access to essentials such as water, hygiene, and sanitation. At the time of this article, they wrote that in March of 2024, the Panamanian government suspended Doctors Without Borders operations in the country, but in October of 2024, so a few months after that happened, negotiations took place, and Doctors Without Borders is currently operating in this region and at the exit point of the Darién Gap. So that's why I wanted to kind of use this episode to bring awareness and also use my birthday to ask people to make donations to Doctors Without Borders, because doing this episode just like it brought up, again, I'm going to keep saying it brought up so many feelings, but also I didn't want this to be, I'm trying really hard for this to not be exploitative and for it to feel like I'm doing this purely for entertainment purposes. Obviously, I want to also educate and to start conversations with you all. And so again, I'm trying to do this as like respectfully as I can and to kind of bring awareness to the lengths that people are willing to go for, again, just a better shot at life or better opportunities, which I think is something that we already know. But this was something the Darién Gap, before doing this episode, I had no idea it existed. And I knew that, you know, journeys into the States were dangerous and were life-threatening. But again, hearing about this one was, it sounds like a movie or something. Like, it sounds almost not real how terrifying it is, or it must be. Okay, continuing, I'm going to skip to the end here, the last two paragraphs here. This says, but to get to the United States, migrants have to cross half a dozen more borders, where they face the risk of being stopped or deported. Even if they reach the southern U.S. border, a journey of roughly 2,500 miles from Central America, many are turned away or expelled back to their home countries. In April 2023, U.S. officials announced they had struck a deal with Colombia and Panama to shut down the Darién Gap route. The proposed 60-day plan was pitched as a part of a broader effort to stem an expected surge in illegal migration at the U.S.-Mexico border. As part of the plan launched in June, Panama's government will dedicate some 1,200 immigration agents, border police, and naval air service members to combat transnational organized crime in the jungle. So again, this is something that was supposed to launch in 2023, 2024 maybe. This continues, but migrant numbers have only grown as hundreds of thousands of people continue to flee worsening poverty and unrest in the so-called Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras and beyond. In September 2023, Panamanian authorities announced that they were increasing migrant deportations and implementing stricter requirements for foreigners seeking short-term stays in the country. In July 2024, newly elected Panamanian President Jose Mulino announced that U.S. officials would begin training Panamanian personnel to screen and deport migrants who entered the country illegally. That same month, it was reported that the Panamanian government had installed barbed wire fencing through the jungle to dissuade crossings. This is some people's only option, and now it is possibly turning into not an option, even though they're, you know, like we've said many times, willing to place their lives at huge risk. And I think, if anything, adding things like barbed wired fences only adds to the danger. It only adds to the danger because people are still going to try and make this journey. And so throwing in fucking barbed wire fences is only going to make it harder and more dangerous for them because they're still going to try. Whew, okay. Moving on to the next one. This is from a website called thebanual.com. This was published by Mike Richard in March of 2025. It's called Inside the Darién Gap, one of the world's most dangerous jungles. And if you cannot say Darién, I've also heard this referred to as Darien, the Darién Gap, but it is the Darién Gap. I wanted to read here. Mike put together kind of like a listicle of some of the dangers, some of the wildlife that people face in the Darién Gap. So the first one here is a fer-de-lance pit viper. The fer-de-lance pit viper is among the most venomous creatures in the Darién Gap. They are irritable, fast-moving, and large enough to bite above your knees. Antivenom usually solves the problem if you get bitten, but if left untreated, the venom can cause local necrosis or death of body tissue, leading to gangrene or, in worst cases, death. Conflict journalist Jason Motlag crossed the gap in 2016 for a Dateline story. After receiving his group's anti-venom kit and instructions before the crossing, he said, if one of us is bitten, we have 10 minutes to inject the anti-venom before death. We can only carry 6 vials. If a larger pit viper were to strike, the experts concedes no amount of anti-venom would be enough to save us. We might as well lie down and smoke a cigarette until the lights go out. So these snakes are all over the place here. And the next thing on this list is drug traffickers and FARC, armed guerrillas. FARC, I think, is the Spanish language acronym for the Armed Forces of Colombia. But this says it's becoming increasingly difficult to bring drugs into the US, so drug traffickers are turning to other avenues. The lawlessness and lack of residents make the Darién Gap a perfect path for smuggling cocaine and other drugs on their journey from South America. So that's another thing about this area, is it's so rife with crime because it's so like just geographically dangerous to get in and out of. So basically authorities just don't even try to get in there. So it's this kind of like no man's land, so to speak. This continues. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia have made a name for themselves since 1964, terrorizing the government and many cities in Colombia. Many from the group have made their home in the lawless jungles of the Darién Gap. A backpacker from Sweden was shot in the head in 2013 and found 2 years later. Multiple others have been kidnapped for weeks or months after venturing into the gap. Since a peace deal in 2017 with the United Nations, as I mentioned earlier, the group has reformed into an official political party, but a few thousand rebels still continue with drugs, arms, and human trafficking. The next thing on this list is the Brazilian wandering spider. It says spiders fill the jungles of the Darién Gap, but one of the most medically important, that's in quotes, medically important, is the Brazilian wandering spider. Medically important is the nice term for you're going to have a really bad day if this bites you, is what this person wrote here. It continues, this family of spiders, there are more than one, has a leg span of 5 to 7 inches. Oh, I just got chills. Oh, that's gross. I don't know if y'all have seen that French film Infested. I've watched it twice now. If you have seen that movie, please let me know. That one, it was like arachnophobia, if you remember that movie. Just spiders everywhere, huge spiders. Oh, gross. Sorry. Okay, this says they wander the jungle floor at night and love to hide in people's hiking boots, logs, and banana plants. They've been nicknamed the banana spider as that's often where people run into them. Bites from this spider can put you in the hospital, or from particularly bad ones, cause death in 2 to 6 hours. So it's like you don't know if you're bitten by one of these things, if you're just gonna be really uncomfortable, or if it's gonna kill you. The next thing on this list is black scorpions. Scorpions look like they're from another planet, Mike writes. A few species prefer conditions, there's that word again, species. A few species prefer conditions in Colombia and southern Panama and call the Darién Gap home, including the black scorpion. Black scorpions can be 2 to 4 inches long and have black or reddish black coloring, which gives them their name. They live under rocks and logs and hunt for larvae and cockroaches at night. They are part of the thick-tailed scorpion family, giving them their stocky appearance. The sting is very painful, but thankfully is rarely deadly to humans, as long as you are treated in a safe amount of time. Next thing here is the jungle heat and dirty water. Even the heat in the jungle can put a serious dent in your mood, Mike writes. Temperatures in the gap can reach a balmy 95 degrees Fahrenheit with 95% humidity, creating a terrible problem if you run out of water. With trips through the gap averaging between, here he writes 20 to 50 days, but I've seen in other sources, and we said earlier, it's around 10 days, maybe more, depending on how well you're able to traverse the gap. There's a lot of water in the Darién Gap, but it is far from clean. Even a sip can hold a host of viruses or parasites that could ruin the rest of your trip. So a good water filter is a must, this says. The next thing on the list is spiked chunga palm trees, or chunga. Chunga, spiked chunga palm trees. Many kinds of trees call the jungle home, and the local people make use of all of them. The fiber from the leaves of the chunga palm is used to make everything from furniture and hats to jewelry and fishing nets. Perhaps that's why this palm has one of the best defenses of any tree in the gap. Long black spines, up to 8 inches long, cover the chunga to prevent animals from climbing and taking the fruit. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. One brush with a chunga and you might find yourself with infected puncture wounds embedded with shards of chunga spines. This thing itself maybe cannot kill you, but it can leave you susceptible to infection, which could be very dangerous depending on how long you're out there with no medical attention. The next thing is ticks, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. They can carry diseases. Apparently they are all over this place when people go through here. There's a story that he included here of some backpackers that said that at the end of their days that they just had to spend an hour or so just picking ticks off of themselves and off of their clothes. The next thing on the list is trench foot, which was first described during Napoleon's retreat from Russia in the winter of 1812, this says, but the name references a condition most common during World War I. It starts with persistently wet skin that isn't allowed to dry, wet conditions, and limited blood flow, which cause the tissue to tingle or itch, often turn red or blue, and eventually decay. Any open wounds quickly develop fungal infections, with all of this happening in as little as 10 hours. It doesn't allow much time to fix the problem, which, as we've mentioned before, the mud in this area will suck onto your feet and hold your shoes, and by the end of the the journey for many people, their shoes are just gone or disintegrated. And so, they can get trench foot this way because it's such a wet region. The next one is botflies. Botflies have always grossed me out. They are flies that can lay eggs under your skin, and then the larva will hatch and crawl out of your skin. So I don't want to explain that too much more, but of course that can leave you susceptible to infection as well. This was one that really threw me for a loop. This next one, they said Mike wrote Cold War bombs. He said, during the Cold War, the U.S. military ran thousands of training missions inside the Darién Gap, dropping bombs over the jungle. Most of them detonated. However, some did not. Those bombs have been covered over by jungle growth and are now hidden on the jungle floor under a thick layer of vegetation. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, Mike says, of undetonated explosives likely still lie in the jungle, waiting for some poor unfortunate soul to step off the trail. What little trail there is, just a bit too far, and set off a massive explosion. That's shocking to me. And then the last two here, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, are crocodiles and landslides. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. Welcome back, Wolf friends. All right, so this next source I want to talk about is from bigthink.com. This says, this travel vlogger crossed the Darién Gap, the world's deadliest migrant route. And this was published in July of 2024. And it says, 2 YouTubers followed South American migrants on their journey to the US along the way. They had to traverse the Darién Gap, this one says 100-mile long stretch of undeveloped jungle. Their recordings document the hardship migrants endured in search of a better life. So this one says 100. I think on average the route is like 60 miles, but again, the stretch of land, it just depends on how you traverse it. It could be 60, it could be more. And I was reading through this. I'm not going to read through this for y'all, but this talks about these 2 YouTubers that documented their journey. They walked side by side with migrants to document what this journey was like. And the video is in this article, but something I wanted to touch on here that they wrote in this article is they talk about the survival mode that people go into. And also, just if you care to look it up, the YouTuber who documented this is Timmy Carter. So if you search Timmy Carter Darién Gap or Darién, it should pop up for you. But this says, crossing the Darién Gap is as much a physical challenge as a mental one. The terrain is treacherous, changing from loose gravel to muddy ground, turned into quicksand by the rain. Because many of them cannot swim, the caminantes, or the walkers, the people who are walking the route, hold hands when crossing rivers. The currents beating against their bodies, climbing up steep, craggy hillsides, holding onto thin old ropes hitched up by previous migrants is hard and scary enough as it is, but even harder and scarier when you're old, pregnant, or carrying a tired toddler in your arms. Falling is a constant fear. So they're talking about how because it's so treacherous, even if you get injured, you could be left behind because no one's going to, carry you. It's every person for themselves. It says food and water weigh you down, so the caminantes enter the Darién Gap with only the bare essentials. Carter and Rich ran out of supplies halfway through the journey. By the time they made it out of the jungle, their faces had grown noticeably thin. This is a quote. It says, the most difficult part was mentally, though, Carter says. You don't know when it will end. There is no guide telling you how far you have to go, how many days you have left. You just keep going. People freak out and give up. Because earlier in this article, they mentioned that they paid for a guide through this. And so I think whoever the guide was someone who was with one of those cartels. But that they were talking about these guys because these guys kind of stuck out. They were Russian. And so they were like, what are Russians doing here? Like, why are they choosing to go through this route? So they were suspicious of them. Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous if like people are suspicious of you if you're not supposed to be there, which, I mean, these guys I don't think were supposed to be there. It's dangerous for them to putting themselves in that situation. Okay, this is a really hard part to hear about. This says, at one point, they passed a mother, father, and baby sitting by the side of the path, begging for food from passersby. The other caminantes just walked past them, Carter and Rich included, the YouTubers. They had already run out themselves, but even if they hadn't, they doubt they would have given it to them. So they saw these people begging for food, a family, and nobody gave them anything. whether they had it or not. Like these YouTubers, they didn't give them anything because they didn't have anything by that point. But they were saying like they don't know if they would have. And there's a quote here that says, "It's difficult to have compassion for other people here in the Darién," Rich confesses in his YouTube video, which currently has over 4.6 million views. Quote continues, "That sounds brutal and harsh when you are sitting at home watching this video on the internet, in America, on your comfy homes in England, wherever you are. But when you're here and it's a matter of life or death, that's the reality of it. You can either save yourself or you can save someone else. And when it comes down to it, we're all selfish," he said. Carter concurs, "The first day I was there, I thought, let's help people," he tells Big Think. In his video, he and Rich argue because Carter gave one of their cans of tuna to a fellow caminante, before they ran out, of course, something he admits he shouldn't have done without prior discussion. As his energy decreased and his hunger and thirst grew, he, like everyone else in the Darién, stopped helping others. You go into survival mode. It's cruel," he said. Carter received some criticism for making this video, for this documentary, and for sharing it. Of course, like it was my kind of worry here is, and I don't know, I've never watched videos from this person, I don't know them, so I would assume that their thought process was maybe hoping to bring attention to it, to show people what's happening. I think it's been relevant for many years, but especially now, like I said earlier, what is happening right now with immigration is extremely relevant. And I think it's important to know, I think maybe to someone who for some reason hasn't found empathy for immigrants, which is very weird, can maybe see or hear about this and find that empathy and find their humanity. I don't know why it would take this, but anyway, this says, although Carter has received some criticism for his video, accusing him of exposing the migrant route and capitalizing on the caminantes suffering for clicks and likes, the vast majority of the responses have been positive, with people believing the video to have both social and political value. There's a quote here that says, "I would like to thank you for documenting this harsh reality." One comment on YouTube reads, "I went with my mother and my two little brothers of 4 and 5 years old. I was 16, my mother was 37. Thank you very much for showing the world the harsh reality that migrants go through. We are not the face of a nation. We are people in need of a better life." Whew, okay. The next source that I have here is actually from Doctors Without Borders, and this is an entry called "The Darién Gap, A Nightmare with 1001 Demons." This is published in 2025. I'm not seeing a byline who this is written by. And there were some things when I was reading through the source earlier that stuck out to me. So one part of this says, "Many of the people who survived the journey across the Darién Gap are haunted by the thought of those who were left behind, those with injured feet or broken bones, too exhausted and too weak to continue, who wait for rescue or aid that may never arrive." This quote says, "I saw at least 10 dead bodies in the jungle," recalls 19-year-old Angel. "But the worst is the people who get left behind, people who cannot climb the mountains or who slip in the rain and mud. It is a route where nobody waits. You see people sitting down, injured, who might have been there for days, waiting for death." Angel left Venezuela 4 years ago and has been working in Cali, Colombia. Like many migrants who arrive in Panama since the start of the pandemic, Angel could no longer work and decided to head toward the US. I'm going to jump ahead. This says, "The future is uncertain for everyone in Bajo Chiquito, where access to clean water, showers, and decent toilets is limited or, for some, non-existent. Eventually, everyone will be transferred to the reception stations in San Vicente and Lajas Blancas, but from there they will have to make their own way forward. Some migrants can afford to buy a bus ticket north, but many cannot, and certain nationalities, including Colombians, Ecuadorians, and Bolivians, are held for processing and then deported. Those who have pending administrative or judicial processes, for example, if they are seeking refugee status in Panama or are witnessed in a case against traffickers, are held at a migrant reception stations for weeks or months. Detained people describe inadequate food and shelter, a lack of clean water and showers, and no way to communicate with their families." I'm going to read that one again. Detained people described inadequate food and shelter, a lack of clean water and showers, and no way to communicate with their families. But despite the risks, people continued to attempt the journey. By the end of July, around 8,000 migrants were waiting in Necoclí, Colombia, to start their trek through the Darién Gap. "They warn you from the U.S., this is a quote, "They warn you from the U.S. Don't do it. It's terrible," says Juan, whose group was assaulted by a group of men with rifles and machetes. "They took their money, mobile phones, and food, and raped the women in the group." Juan continues, "But you have to, and you think, if he did it, why can't I do it? But honestly, don't do it. It's terrible." So even people who have done this, maybe their feeling is that it's not worth it, depending on what they went through, what they saw in this journey. To many people, it is worth it to even attempt, but then to even maybe make it across and then to get deported after going through literal hell. I can't imagine that. Okay, so the last two sources that I have here are there. It's talking about the Embera people that live in this area. I just wanted to include this kind of as like an interesting fact about this area, that it's technically habitable, but like I mentioned earlier, people kind of live in the shores or the riverfronts of this area, not really in it. But apparently this is also an area that has a lot of artifacts, like pre-colonial and colonial artifacts that they just find. And so these last two sources, I'm not going to go super into them, but I do want to mention that it's really interesting because it talks about what research is, like what classifies as research, what classifies as archaeology when it's indigenous people or people indigenous to the area that are doing it. So yeah, it's just like an interesting kind of food for thought kind of thing. But the websites that they're from are, this one is just researchgate.net, and this is an article that's called The Embera, Tourism and Indigenous Archaeology, quote, Rediscovering the Past in Eastern Panama. This was published in 2012. And the other one is from sites.exeter.ac.uk or from the University of Exeter. It's titled Serranía de las Quinchas, Indigenous Embera and Spirits Entangled. It doesn't, so these two don't talk much or at all about the Darién Gap and like the journey through it, but more so again about the Embera people who live on the Panamanian side of the Darién province. Welcome back, girlfriends. Thank you once again for joining me for today's episode. I know this one maybe was not the most fun that we've had. Doing this episode kind of felt very heavy for me just because of how based in reality it is and what that reality is. It's a real life horror story and it's tragic. And so again, I would be so moved if you all joined me in my fundraising for Doctors Without Borders, specifically in honor of the work that they are doing at the exit points of the Darién Gap and helping these people after they've gone what they've gone through with, of course, physical care, physical medical attention, and also mental health services. Because again, if you've listened to the show, if you've listened to me rant and rave, then you know how I feel about addressing those things hand in hand and holistically. And this is such a traumatic experience. I cannot even begin to imagine. So again, if you would like to make a donation to my birthday fundraising campaign for Doctors Without Borders, you can visit events.doctorswithoutborders.org/campaigns/Susto. Again, links will be all over social media, and I'll include it in the social media post about this episode and in the show notes of this episode, of course. So, as always, if you would like to tell your own scary story, if you have a photo, video, recording, anything that you think I should share on a Letters from the Beyond episode or on social media, please visit my website, that's sustopodcast.com, and hit the submit a story button. You can also visit my Linktree, linktr.ee/sustopodcast, and hit the tell me a story button there. Again, please reach out to event organizers or send their information to me for events during the spooky season. If you are an event organizer, please hit me up. Let's work on something together. I'm so excited to get out there, as I am every year. And we have those two events coming up: Austin Public Library on the 10th, the Ruiz branch, and the Night Owls Spirit Social on Halloween night. Thank you all so much. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. I am turning a lovely 33, and I am just so happy to be able to celebrate my birthday with you all. I can't believe it lined up perfectly. Yes, I can. I'm a witch. We're all witches, right? So thank you for being here. I hope that you took something away from this episode. If you would like to support the episode, of course, the easiest way to do so is by interacting wherever you are listening, by sharing it with your own ghoul friends. And if you would like to support in exchange for exclusive perks and goodies, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/sustopodcast. podcast and checking out the tiers and seeing if any of those work for you. A huge shout out to this episode's patrons. You are Liza, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April D, Josette, Sam, Mandy, Jules, Lori, Jeannie, Desiree C, Ashes, Neressa, Rachel A, Azucena, Marlene, Chata, Lainey, Desiree, Carla, Archer, Ricardo, Vanessa, Maritza, Nieves, Manor Mall, Iris, Mar, Flor, Selena, Nightingale, Clint, and Rachel W. Thank you all so much. Your support means the underworld to me. I will talk to you in the next episode, or I will see you because this is also a video version, of course, for Best School Friends on Patreon. Until then, no te asustes. Bye.